Okay, we are here at Greendale People's Church, and I would say good morning, poison squirrels. And you're saying, what? I remember way back when, around the year 1980, when Bob and Betsy got married. I was a teacher back at the time, a phys ed teacher. So I had summers off, and one summer I worked at Chicago Fest, which was on Navy Pier in downtown Chicago. Crazy thing. Yes. And I worked at one of the beer booths, pouring beer. And our booth happened to be near the rock stage, where the hard rock music was being played. One day, while I was working there, the band that was playing on the rock stage was called the Poison Squirrels. And I'm like, what in the world? This kind of name is that? So one of the band members came for a beer at one point. And I said, you have to tell me, where did you get the name Poison Squirrels? And he said, well, the founder of our band was looking for a name. And he remembered when he was a kid, he would tune into a TV station in the morning. And the host would say, good morning, boys and girls. But he thought he was saying, good morning, poison squirrels. Oh! So, it has nothing to do with theology. In fact, to the contrary. But here we are today, and I'm here with all of my poison squirrels. So, if you're at home, you're as squirrely as the rest of us, I'm sure, because you're tuned in today to theology class. So welcome. Let's pray. Lord, thank you for the gift of this day. Thank you for all the ways that you are with us throughout the day, even though we don't recognize, because our noses are down in our work and in our tasks and in our situations, and we forget that you are all around us. And you are nearer to us than we are to ourselves. So I pray in some way today we think about how you break into our lives, and we come to appreciate it and let you, in your wondrous ways, transform us in those events. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, so did anybody come today with a question? Because I did. Apparently not. So if anyone at home has a question, just comment on YouTube. Is it YouTube or is it Facebook?
YouTube.
Okay, just comment and we'll answer the question next week. Betsy has offered to answer your questions, whatever they may be.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, then let's just dig right in, okay? So recall week number 1, when that's at the top of your page here that you have. And it all had to do with me questioning how we make only the Bible the basis of our Christian belief and faith often. And it came out of a class in Romans that from way back in seminary, my goodness, long, long ago. 30-some years ago, and we're studying the character Abraham in Romans chapter 4. And it just occurred to me that here we are making such a fuss about all the Greek words and the construction of the sentences, and what was the context in Rome when Paul wrote the letter to the people in Rome and all this kind of stuff. And I said, isn't that interesting? We're so focused on this text, on this book, that we forget that this book is a written story about somebody who lived without a Bible. And so how does a person experience God in a way without the Bible? So if we all went on a 3-hour tour and the weather started getting rough and our tiny ship was tossed, and if not for the courage of the fearless crew, we all would be lost and we would end up on an island. What show was that? Who knows? Gilligan's Island. Okay. So my guess is they didn't have a Bible as far as on Gilligan's Island. So how do you deal with faith if you don't have this written thing. And so Abraham did not have this thing available to him called the Bible or anything written, because he was the first, he was the original. So everybody started writing about him after the fact, but he had to live without that. So how does a person experience faith in God without all of these helps of a religion, of a book, and so on? And so we talked about that. And I have here for your pleasure one of my favorite quotes from Kierkegaard: "Life is only understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards." Yeah. And so we can look back at Abraham and understand him. Abraham did not have that luxury. He had to live forwards. And so we talked about that a little bit. And I don't know if anybody was thinking about their own experiences, because on the last day of class, you'll be given an opportunity to talk about your experiences from that standpoint, living forward and not understanding what's ahead of you, only being able to look back and understand. So that's usually the way life works. So you can think about that. Then last week, we went to Abraham and Moses. They were people, once again, who basically went without religion. Remember, we contrasted relationship with religion. And we all kind of determined that we were more relationship people than we are religion. Religion are practices that we involve ourselves in. Observing certain days. I mean, last week was Trinity Sunday. Week before was Pentecost Sunday. And during that week was Ascension Day, the day when Jesus was ascended. And in some Christian traditions, they observe those pretty strictly and they celebrate them. And often on those days, the priest or the pastor has all of these special colors and special things that go as they lead worship. So, and then before that was Easter, and then before Good Friday, and so on. You observe certain days and you do certain things. And usually a religion basically tells you kind of what to believe. In some cases, you either believe it or you're in trouble. In some cases, it is a written statement, like a creed, that gives you guidance. And you can interpret it and apply it according to your own, your own preferences. So that's usually the way it works in 21st century America, anyhow. Okay, does anybody remember anything that about those last two Wednesdays that just really are sticking with you that you watch? Bill?
Yes. You actually helped today. When we look at the week of May 22nd, just blows me away when it's the second line at the end. It says they were in a personal relationship with God. Moving to ahead of the next one, it says Moses' relationship with God was turned into religion. So my point is this: like any pastor, any minister, like Moses, if they're not exhibiting what's being taught, so clearly this became a religion for Moses because people saw what Moses was doing. So based on what Moses' actions were, or any leader, and then it became a religion.
Well, actually, and when the Israelites first kind of settled in, they came up with all kinds of things about, women could not enter the temple at certain times. We won't go into why and all the specifics because that's unnecessary, but in certain ways that you would treat foreigners, your slaves or servants, how you would worship, how the sacrifices were to be done, when they were to be done. So it was really prescribed. It was all written down. This is what you're supposed to do. Rules, yeah. And a lot of rules. Yeah, 10 Commandments and that kind of thing. So today we're going to kind of continue on and contrast sort of the the experiential faith, which is what Abraham and Moses had originally, as I said, they didn't have all these other things. How do you experience God and come to conclusions or ideas about God based on your own experience? And then what are the things that you have learned? And so that now that you've learned them, you understand experience based on what you've been taught about God and about Jesus and so on. And so I'm borrowing now today heavily from a man who is now deceased, but he was probably as famous a sociologist as anyone in the 20th century. His name was Peter Berger, and I've read Peter Berger books. I mentioned something about Berger when at Harvard, when I went there, listened to him lecture and had a couple questions for him. I may skip that because anyhow, he was a highly noted sociologist, and particularly of religion. So he did his PhD thesis on the study of Latina Pentecostal churches in New York City. And what are the things they do? What are their characteristics? If you look as a sociologist, you're not really getting caught up in all the things that they're saying. So what are they doing? How are they doing it? What does it mean to all these people? They would often get together for services almost every night of the week. And at one point he said, well, they must really be zealous. They love the Lord. They want to keep. He discovers in observing them longer and longer, a lot of them were lonely. And they wanted some friends. They wanted to be with other people. In other cases, they worked jobs where they were beaten up and mistreated and undervalued. And man, they wanted to go someplace where they could just blow off some steam. And so they'd go to church, and the Pentecostal tradition, it would get pretty lively. So he saw it wasn't just about the Lord, it was what they had in real need, In other cases, somebody has just arrived to New York City from a Spanish-speaking country, and they're lost, and they haven't gotten a job yet. Well, you got to start making connections, right? So he started to see all of these things that were taking place that in a way had nothing to do with, let's say, God or worship, just what was the human element going on with people. And, but then he also did a lot of other things in a lot of other areas. And then he also did a lot of work with the Baha'i faith. And the Baha'i faith, he determined, I don't know much about it, but it was begun by a real charismatic, outgoing, a powerful person with a personality that was magnetic. And out of this one man and his charismatic, magnetic personality, he started to develop a group of people around him. And he had his own beliefs. And so they started to follow these beliefs and said, well, we're going to follow this great leader and what he's saying. And it eventually became sort of a religion or a faith. And then he died. And then what happens? Well, then they have to start writing it down. It's no longer about a personality, a magnetic individual. Now they have to figure out, well, how are we going to hold this darn thing together without this charismatic leader? And how are we going to continue it, for generations to come now that he's gone? So he studied religion in those ways that are kind of more human. One of the hard things about any religious group is, and I hate it with a passion, whenever anything starts to become about me. Because really and truly, if I'm doing this properly and fulfilling my ordination vows, I'm not pointing to myself. I'm trying to point people to Jesus. But how easy it can become when the same person stands in front of you Sunday after Sunday and is speaking, how the focus starts to become just on that person. And then that person leaves. And then what? everybody got used to the old guy, you know, and I've often said, in fact, I've told Bob, a pastor's only appreciated either after he dies or after he leaves. Because nobody knew how used to that guy they had become. And so then there's a crisis. So, you know, this whole idea. So Peter Berger was into a lot of that. But one of the things he said also, now we're on today, is he differentiated two ways of living the faith, okay? Or practicing the faith or understanding. It's what he would call inductive, and there is deductive. And I've already kind of tipped you off to some of this. Inductive is basically this. You have an experience, and then you're trying to figure out what in the world happened in this experience. And you think about it. And then you start to talk to other people who've had the same experience, or you try to make sense of it with people, and eventually you arrive at a conclusion. This is what happened. And inductive faith means you have a profound experience. And you're trying to figure out how God was somehow involved in this. But I'm trying to figure out how, and what does it say about God, and how God is involved in my life based on this experience. So here's an experience I once had. Okay? And I probably told this story once or twice or three times. When I was in Lexington, serving the church there, we did a lot of work with an orphanage in Mexico. And we would go down there and do like week-long or longer mission trips and help them do certain things in the orphanage to kind of bring it up to snuff. And some of the ladies of the church who had gone down there said, we should do a Christmas project and send something to the orphans for Christmas. They'd love it. Feliz Navidad. It'll be a happy Merry Christmas. So they got all of these backpacks, and everybody signed up. I'll go buy pencils, and I'll buy, you know, paper, and everybody kind of signed up for something. One day they collected everything that everybody brought, and they filled each of the backpacks with all of these items. Yeah, so this is great. So then they box them up. And the guy who was in charge of the project, a guy named Dave from New Jersey, stood in front of the congregation and said, we've done all of this great work trying to gather these backpacks for the orphans, and we want to ship these things. We're going to pass around an empty coffee can. Remember when coffee cans were used for all kinds of things? My grandfather used to put his fishing worms in and go have coffee can. So we passed around an old empty coffee can around the whole church, and you know, most people probably passed it by because they were going to give in the offering anyhow. But the total that was gathered that day came to something like $60. Let's say $60. And so Dave took that money and went to the UPS store the next day with all the boxes. He goes to the UPS store, he puts them on the scale, and they weigh them all. The guy totals it all up and says, the total is $60.10. I mean, almost exactly the same amount. So Dave takes out the $60, pulls out a dime, and everything's done. And Dave is he's dumbstruck by, isn't this amazing? God is somehow involved, and this is to Dave. This was a message saying, God is affirming our work. This is wonderful. We have a God who's involved in this. We're doing the right thing, and God is letting us know that. And Dave told the congregation that the next Sunday after this, during announcement time. Well, what do you think the reactions of the people were?
I would say some said, wow, that's great. And others said, it's a coincidence.
That's exactly right.
I saw that coming.
It's the interpretation.
Yeah. It's just a coincidence. It doesn't mean anything. And others were like, hallelujah, this is wonderful. Okay, so I'm telling you this story as an example of inductive faith. You have an experience. Then comes the interpretation or the conclusions that you have from it. And so that's an example of an inductive experience. I think Moses coming to the burning bush was an experience that afterwards he had to do some thinking about. Deductive says this: you are already told what it all means. Doctrines, religious statements. So first you have the statement. This is what God is like. You know, God in three persons. There's the Trinity. This is what God is like. God is like a hurt husband whose wife has run out on him, like in Hosea that you studied in that. Yeah. God is like a jealous parent whose child has kind of left, and God is like this. So, in other words, there's the statement, and then you have experiences. And the experiences simply affirm the statement that was already made. So in my class, the teacher was going deductively. Remember that class I'm telling you about, Romans? This is what the Bible says. This is what we believe. This is what the Greek words meant. This is what the Romans were, how they were reading it when they first received this letter. This is the statement. Now, you have the full understanding of this. Now go out in the world and experience and understand all your experiences based on those statements. So you see the difference? Karen, your experience of the UMass going to Trinity Church that you shared with us. Using this is, maybe I'm asking too much of you. Can you think about what was that experience like for you? You probably already had some knowledge and some statements. You had attended church, so you understood God to some extent.
Right. At that point, I faced it as if, you know, God is with me. This is gonna work out type of thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you already had the statement, the Lord is with us.
Yeah.
And somebody had told you that at one time. Probably in Sunday school or who knows where.
It's probably not Sunday school because I really wasn't a big Sunday school goer. But from the experience I had here, I think, and other, I think it's kind of inductive too, because experiences I had, and I learned from those that God is with you and He will work out, and worrying about it, because as a kid, I was a worrier. If I didn't worry, it wasn't going to happen. That was my theory. If I didn't worry enough, it wasn't going to happen the way I wanted it. So, but as I grew older, I got the experience, and then I thought, He is with me always, and it will work out. I just have to be patient. And then when I got laid off, I reversed it. It was deductive because I already had that statement that He is with me. It will work out, and
put to the test.
Exactly. So I think we kind of go back and forth between these, and so we're not an either or, a hard and fast. So we go back and forth between this, and one of the interesting things is it is in our conclusions and in the statements where we're not alone, where we're with other people, because other people have told us the statements. Other people help us arrive at conclusions by helping us sort out what our experience meant. Sometimes they'll share their own experiences, and you'll come to understand your own experience so much the better. So he talks about this, and so you see that Abraham, they had experiences first, then they kind of come to conclusions. We're given all these statements. One of the things you're receiving here today is some knowledge and some information, so that when you go out and have experiences, you say, I get it. Doug was talking about this. This is the way God works, or whatever. So I'm telling you all of this because this actually matters, because and it's going to matter on the last day when you give your stories, because you can start to think about inductively and deductively your own experiences and make sense of them that way. Okay, so we're going to get to some of this sooner than later, I hope. So
We'll see.
Okay, so here's the thing. Here's one of the things that people will tell you. People who are inductive, they're not childish. You know, they start to think for themselves because they have an experience and they say, well, you know what? This is what I think is happening. They're not like little kids who need to be told everything. And so they're said they're not childish. Or what some people call bad faith. You believe it only because somebody told you. Okay. Deductive people, they say, oh, they're childish. Are childish because they need somebody to tell them because they can't seem to figure it out on their own. Here's what I'm going to say, and you can read it right here if you're already reading, because I see Betsy's looking at her page. I think inductive people run the risk of being like adolescents. Well, just because mom and dad say so, I'm not going to do it. The church tells me this. Well, I'm going to show that church. I'm smarter than all those guys, those people. You know, what do they know? I know it all. And that's where I came up with this thing. When I worked in college, I was a janitor to make a little extra money during the school year. And we would go to the maintenance building and go see the guy who was in charge of the buildings, cleaning the buildings, the janitorial supervisor. And he would give us our assignment. Go and clean the toilets in such and such a dormitory, sweep the floors in the main cafeteria entry, whatever it was. Well, he had a sign on his door. And it said something like this, and it's on your page. Teenagers tired of being hassled by your parents? Act now. Move out. Get a job. Pay your own bills while you still know everything. And here's one of the things. Real fuss budget inductive people will say, I don't care what the church says because it's my experience and I know better than they do. That's kind of adolescent because, I mean, every church I've ever been to, I think people have benefited by there being some instruction and some guidance. We need help in understanding these kind of things. Betsy needed to ask a question. What is this apostle and disciple stuff? Well, I'm able to provide that for her because I could tell Betsy was so troubled by this that she was losing sleep. And Bob was trying to comfort her and console her. Betsy, it's okay. We'll go to
not losing sleep.
Okay. Anyhow, we can become real adolescent about this. Whereas deductive, yes, it can be childish. It's like, well, the Bible says it, I believe it, that settles it. I don't want to think about it. Case closed. So it can be. But here's what I want to say, and what I want to encourage all of you, those who are watching at home, to even go beyond this a little bit. And I have another quote. And I learned this quote when the former Celtic and he played for other teams, Portland Trailblazers, Bill Walton was a basketball player. He died over the Memorial Day weekend. And so I, being a fan of sports, read about this, and Bill Walton kept on his desk all his life from the time he was at UCLA, where he played basketball, for a legendary coach named John Wooden. John Wooden won so many championships, and he wrote a handwritten note to Bill Walton that said this: Bill Walton, what matters is what you learn after you know it all. And so that's humbling, because I would imagine Bill Walton, when he was at UCLA, arrived when he was still one of these. And he was very talented and very exceptional. And he probably thought he knew it all. And his coach wrote him that, which I think is really good stuff. And what really matters in this inductive, okay, there's always something still to be learned from our experiences. But the deductive, which says other people can still help you learn some things. Yeah. And so, and what some people have told you in the past that would be beneficial to you might really actually be good advice. So rather than sloughing them off, thinking you know it all, maybe you could learn something from those people. And that's one way of doing your theology. You can think about it deductively, and you can figure out, I don't know what just happened. I'll send Doug an email message and he'll let me know what happened. That's kind of a way, and I don't think that's childish, I just think that's curious. A way of getting a statement. Inductive is something happens to you. Has anything ever happened to you, inductively or deductively, in your own experience, that, and Karen shared hers and I shared one for me. Does anybody else have anything so we can further kind of understand this difference?
Mine's similar to Karen's.
Yeah.
When I was running out of my fourth job at the bank in Worcester County, they want me to go to Boston, work for the tax department, where everybody had quit. I quit, so I gave my notice, which nobody thought I'd ever do what I did. So it took a while, but I don't know how much relying on God at that time.
Yeah.
It's because people were moving from some of the jobs I had that I networking got me out of the job rather quickly, about 3 months.
So maybe you weren't thinking about God at the time you had that experience. In hindsight, and since then, you have.
Yeah.
So that was an inductive thing where you had the experience, and then you start to come to some conclusions. Wow, God is faithful.
Of course, I was getting paid during that time because
So much better, hey?
32 years.
Hey, experiences don't have to come free, you know. So, all right. So that's one of the things that we are talking about here. So now here comes a thing that really put Peter Berger on the map. He said, and I think he's right, that what we experience every day as reality is something that human beings created. And that they decided this is the way we want to form and shape and understand our world. And they put it out there, and they all talk about it, and they all agree on it. And even though they're not every day negotiating, well, this is what reality, they're all kind of living in it and starting to understand this world out here. And eventually that world that they understand starts to shape the way they think. So he called it, you externalize, and then you have an objectification out there, and then you internalize it. So I would say my in-laws, you talk about their reality. When I drive with my in-laws anywhere, they will want to know at any given moment what town we are in, how we are driving. What town are we in? Because for them, somehow they want to know what is the reality out there that they are in. And I would say, well, right now we're going through Uxbridge. We're on our way up to Worcester. At Worcester, we'll catch the Pike, and we'll take the Pike out to Pittsfield, where my daughter is. And this is where we're going to be. And throughout the drive, they're going to want to know, what town are we in? And I sometimes think this, because they've so internalized this reality. When there were dinosaurs roaming around, were any of these towns in existence?
No.
There was no such thing. There were no cities There were no city limits. There were no borders. And everything came about because human beings come along and say, we're going to make ourselves a world. And this world is going to be called Massachusetts. And we're going to divide Massachusetts up. And we're going to have different cities and towns like Amherst and Westfield. And that's a joke. Betsy pronounces it Amherst, not Amherst with a hard H. So I used to tease her about it until I Googled it and found out that in Amherst, that's the way they pronounce it, Amherst. They say, get the H out of Amherst.
So I was right.
She was right. Anyhow, so we have this world that we all live in. But it's not just city limits. It's all the customs that we all adopt and the way we understand the world around us. We also have to take it for granted. We take it for granted. And some people are beginning to wonder, where's he going with this? Where I'm going with this is, if you're going to experience a world and have experiences in this world of God, you have to understand what's the world that you're in and how do you experience a God in this particular world. In our world as it presently stands, most people go through their day in this objective reality, not even giving God a second thought or understanding God, because basically the reality of 21st century world is you're on your own. We're all just basically on our own. There may be a God, but God is distant. And if you want to pray to get God, get a little help from God, you pray. If you don't need help, God just doesn't have anything to do with this. You go about life as though God doesn't matter. That's basically our world. And our world is determined by our customs. And it's not just real estate. It's not just geography. It's also this thing here that really determines. When the dinosaurs were going around, they weren't saying, by golly, it's getting near noon. And the Tyrannosaurus Rex is thinking, I got to find me a little dinosaur to munch on because it's almost lunchtime. They're not thinking that way. But we have created a reality that is so determined by all of these things, and that we forget that there's something more than just this one reality. Yeah. So I tell you, there was a man named Pritchard. Pritchard was an anthropologist. And Pritchard was an Englishman. So I suppose he had tea time at some time. That was his custom. And he went to Africa, to a remote tribe in the Nile region, a tribe where they've hardly ever seen any outsider before. And he wanted to study what was the world that they lived in. What were their ideas? What were their customs? And so on. Well, it turns out in that particular culture, in that society, they understood like the whole world is kind of, like the trees have spirits, and the stars move in certain ways because there's this magical kind of world that's filled with all of these spiritual beings. And that's the way they understood the world. And he comes from a part of the world where nobody ever thinks about that. There's no spirits in those plants that Nancy waters here in the garden room and all that. It's just us on our own. And so here he is with a group of people. They're in the same location, but they're living two different realities. Do you understand it? And it's very much like that. So he would ask them a lot of questions about what they think, what they're doing, what they're believing, and so on. He did that for several months. One day it occurred to him. So he gathers all the people of the tribe together and says, you know what? For months, I've been asking you questions. And it just hit me. It would only be fair if I allowed you to ask me questions about myself and what I'm thinking. This was all through a translator. And so finally, one guy kind of raises his hand kind of shyly and says, well, Dr. Pritchard, we've been talking to each other and we're curious why it is that every time you have to make a big decision, you consult the God on your wrist. And he said he had so much trouble on trying to explain to them, no, this is not a God, this is a timepiece. And the timepiece is telling me what time of day it is and what my schedule is for the day that I have to follow. And none of that would mean anything to them because they didn't go by time, they didn't go by schedules, they just lived. And at that point, it occurred to him how different his reality that he was living in was different from theirs.
Yeah.
Quite a bit different. And so now going back to Peter Berger, he would say, in 21st century world, we are living a particular reality that we take for granted as being the way things eternally are, when in fact, it's just something we created. So I was not going to tell you this story about when he lectured at Harvard. I was in a church in Lexington, so I went down to see him. I had a friend who was a Harvard professor, and he invited me, so we had a nice day. And Dr. Berger's lecture that day was on the Christian movement in the third world. You know, in our secular world, particularly in Europe, nobody goes to church anymore. And in America, people are increasingly saying, no, I don't go to church. You know, we're just basically on our own. We're kind of living in an empty world. And he says, but they don't have that same reality in other parts of the world. You know, they have a magical, enchanted world that they live in, and so they experience the Christian faith very differently. And so he was lecturing on that, and I asked him something about. I contrasted them against us, Western people, and boy, he said, "Sir, whenever I hear the word 'we,' I know you are speaking sociologically, and when you say 'we,' people often mean that we all think that way." And he says, if you're a good sociologist, you understand that though we can say we, there's no universal thought that everyone is thinking, that everyone is actually very different. And he said, do you know that in Great Britain, 40% of the population still believe in ghosts? So what's this we that you're talking about? Boy, did he put me in my place. I got to thinking, yeah, he's right. And so now to this day, whenever I hear we, anybody talking about we, it's like, are you so sure? Because there's no universal we at Greendale People's Church. Well, this is what we think here. No, a lot of people think very differently. And he really got me to understand that not only is there a cultural reality, like in the Nile tribe, this is the world that they live in. And Pritchard, though in the same location, lived in a different world, a different reality. Even in a place like this, people have their own understanding of reality. Go ahead, Bill.
Right.
Everything that I was hearing from you absolutely fits with, and you may be familiar with this. When we hear about the now, are you here right now? We roll up into our heads. That's the we. I do, you, everybody. Now, the key is, for me, what you're saying is, you come to church for a reason, okay? Your 100% focus is on what motivated you to come, and you stay there. Now, what does that mean? Like the person that went and looking at the watch, they're not looking at watches, they're in the now. Everything that unfolds in front of them is impermanent, and they realize that naturally. Yeah. You agree? So it's all about, are you really right here now? Because if you're thinking about anything other than right here and now, you're not there. And that's the difference. That God is now is my point. To me, is now. So okay. So I just simply, like, my grandson turned to me and he went, yesterday, play with me. Out of nowhere. And I was not in a good place. I had just gotten into the house in one of those deals where you wanted to shut down. So it took me 5 minutes and I went into the now because I was not there. And I walked up to him and I said, you asked Gugu, and I said, well, yeah, I'm good. I said, so what do you want? So the point is I turned it into what it was intended to be. Now. And there's the joy, and there's every single day is an adventure to me, because I stay right here and now. That's my point. And not,
Yeah.
because it's not rolling back. You don't give it out. Anyway.
Okay, well, you know,
That's what you were
I know
saying.
that-
That's what you were saying.
We are very watch oriented. We are very time oriented. I know that there's a certain amount of time that I still have. I'm not completely in the now. I'm in this, where are we going? How much time do we have left? And determined by a reality that is not the now, the actual ourselves in it. The clock is basically the great reality. But we've all been so programmed.
Correct.
To that.
To be aware of it is such a gift, a grace.
Yeah.
To be aware. Catch yourself, you're not in the now. And wow, does it get wonderful.
Yeah. Well, how many of us have ever been involved in something that we just we're just so focused in on and so into, and we look up at the clock later and say, wow, the time flies.
Yeah, that's right.
Because we were actually outside that everyday reality that is all determined by the time and determined by what you're supposed to do and the schedules. You were just living and you were just doing, and none of that mattered. And Berger would say, you in those moments have just experienced eternity. It's a transcendent experience in your and in your lives that's different from your everyday reality. And that those are the kind of things that point to a greater reality than just the one that we've all put together, where Westfield is separate from Amherst, and Amherst is separate from Worcester, and Worcester is separate from Holden, and in Holden they have this kind of government, and all this kind of stuff. You're in a relationship with yourself and with a higher reality where none of that stuff matters. And that's the experience of eternity. You know, it's like one of the things about Amazing Grace, when we've been there 10,000 years, they're not years. It's just you are always in this eternal now. So, okay, so the point of it all is this. Okay, I'm starting to think I'm getting a little bit too academic and everything, but our reality, our everyday reality, everyday life, Berger says, and this is a Christian understanding, is penultimate. Who knows what that means?
I do not know.
Penultimate means next to last.
Okay.
It is not the ultimate. So it's like, the next to last. So in other words, there's still something more beyond. Then there is ultimate reality. Ultimate reality are those moments of the eternal experience of God, where you're not caught up in everyday tasks and everyday schedules, but now you experience the breaking in of something that is beyond just everyday reality. And he would say, these are the things that point to the fact that there is a God. Because these ultimate experiences, Moses at the burning bush, Karen hearing about the new job, the collection at the church and this marvelous offering that's right on the money, is a breaking in of an ultimate reality that's greater than the everyday reality. But here's the problem. Living in ultimate reality doesn't pay real well. Everyday reality is where you have to go to work, put in your hours, observe the rules in order to kind of keep everyday reality going. And so everyday reality can become for some people all there is. But Berger would say, but by God and God's grace will break through everyday reality every once in a while and show us a glimpse of something greater. And so flip your, and so I can flip your page over and we'll try to do this quick. And so he says, okay, let's think about the different ways that God breaks into your reality and you have experiences. Okay, remember, we're back to experiencing because we're living life forwards, not always backwards. He says the first one is this, and everybody knows of this experience where somehow in everyday life and in the problems of everyday life, a greater reality becomes known and accepted. And he said he describes it as the understanding that there is order in the universe. And Berger had this great experience, from what I understand, where he was a little boy and grew up in Austria during some troubled times in Austria. And in the middle of the night, he was terrified and scared. Everything's going to go down. And his mother came to him during the night when he's troubled about all the things, you know, in this world. And she said to him, don't worry, everything is going to be okay. Everything is going to be just fine. And he said that hit him in such a profound way that in everyday reality of little kids living their lives, and the troubles that can come with it, and the fears and the worries, that's not all there is. And his mother convinced him in her comforting and in her words, Peter, everything is going to be okay. In other words, this is not all there is. That there is an ultimate reality that is holding together this entire universe in your life. And that no matter what happens, everything will be well. We live in an orderly universe. And so you need not fear. And for him, that was a profound experience where into his little reality as a little boy came a visit from another reality that says, I know in your own daily reality, you're afraid, but there's a greater reality, an ultimate reality in which there is order and there is peace. And I think that's kind of what we've talked a little bit about here. In the everyday reality of losing jobs or leaving jobs, in the everyday reality of having a diagnosis that throws you for a loop, that's everyday reality. I mean, all of us are mortal, all of us are human, and therefore we have human emotions, we have human bodies that suffer in certain ways. But in all of that, there's something even more ultimate. And Berger would say, one of the ways you experience that is in order. And his favorite experience that he uses to tell people is his own experience as a little boy. Anybody have any comment on that? The experience of understanding that at a deeper level or a higher level, however you want to put it, there's something more than these everyday problems. And that is the enduring, eternal grace of God. And when Jesus says the kingdom of God has come upon you, it's like an order is coming into everyday life that's far beyond. And that's when the blind would see and the lame would walk and all these things would happen because an ultimate reality breaks into everyday life to say there's order and so on. And you know, as much as anything, the order of as the apostles, when they were sent, would go around saying, you folks killed him, but God raised him up. When they talk about Jesus. In everyday reality, you wanted to get rid of this guy because he was making life difficult for you. So you thought your everyday reality held sway and is the last word. But there's an ultimate reality. All of what you did was next to last. The last was God raised him. And so there is order. So anybody? All right, sorry. I'm probably doing more talk than I should. Okay, the next one is play. Play, he says, the wonderful thing about play is you leave everyday reality and you enter into something that's different. So when you go to play golf, Bob used to go golfing, you would actually go to a different location and you would undertake things that had nothing to do with your everyday reality, banking and so on, and you would play, and you would like enter a separate world that functioned differently from the world you came from when you left the bank. And so play is a way of experiencing another world, which is to say that everyday reality, the bank, was not ultimate reality. That the bank, though you needed to be there, was only penultimate, that there's a reality greater than that. Play reminds us of that everyday life is not ultimate, that we can enter a different world, a world filled with joy and pleasure, companionship with others. Anybody have, when you were a kid, when I was a little kid, when my cousins came over, there was something about when I was with my cousins, it was like everyday reality was gone, and time would just fly by. And then you know, my aunt and uncle would say, okay, time to leave. We'd be like, oh, because we lost all track of time, because we were in a different world and we were playing. And play is a way of understanding that everyday reality of work and making money and following all those rules are set aside.
Yeah.
Anybody
ever play, but adults kind of lose that.
Yeah.
But every now and then you get like a fun thing that happens, and you remember.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you know what?
Your grandkids, you play with your grandkids.
You know what? I'm going to let you in on a little secret. For regarding play, we do our pizza parties every once in a while.
Yeah.
When I thought of this, and Carolina and Bob and Betsy kind of came alongside, and we all decided to do this. That's what I was thinking. We are going to do something for a little while that is out of the everyday reality of being a church. And we're going to come together, and we're not going to do anything that we try to feel as though we're accomplishing something.
Yeah.
It is purely play.
Yeah.
And Carolina, I mean, people are commenting about a wonderful job she did with the Motown thing, and you eat pizza. There's no agenda. There's no passing. There's no failing. You just enjoy. Yeah. And you enter a little time where you're refreshed, and you say everyday life is not everything. And Berger would say your experiences of play actually point to the fact that there's a greater reality than this everyday life. And that's what gives us then hope, which he says is the next thing. Where everyday reality says, when you die, we put you in a casket, or we cremate you, and we never see you again. So when you die, all is over. Because everyday reality goes on just fine. I had one chilling experience once when I was preparing a sermon, sitting at my desk, at my computer, and it was garbage day. This was when I lived in Illinois. And I heard the garbage truck go by and pick up the stuff, you know, kind of put it in the thing and move on. And then I started hearing some dogs bark. You know what hit me in that moment? The day I die, whenever that is, the very next day, those garbage trucks are going to be going down the street. The dogs are going to be barking. I'm just not going to be here. And it was an actual chilling fact to say, wow, this is all temporary. This is all penultimate. And this everyday world is going to go on without me. And then you start thinking, but where will I be? What will become of me? Will I just be nothing more than a memory for a few people? And then when they die, nobody remembers me, so it's like I never existed? Or do we say, no, the day after that happens, the day after I die, or the day I die, I go and I live. And I have hope beyond the everyday life, something greater than that. And that is a place where Jesus has gone to prepare for us. And when we die, he'll come and get us. So when you experience something greater than everyday life saying it is final, you are experiencing hope, which is a way of experience something greater than this reality. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So
when somebody you love dies, you know, I'm not just about me. Somebody I love dies. well, of course you're sad, but
Mhm.
you have that hope.
Yes,
They're in heaven now,
yes.
and all pain and all sadness is gone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's your hope beyond everyday reality. It says there's something more ultimate than that.
Yeah.
That's something, if anybody ever wants to talk about that or think about that. You know, for a long time, my mother died when I was like 20, 21. She was only 45. I dreamed about her, and I would wake up, you know, kind of like, you know, chill, thinking she's still alive in some way. You know, in other words, her death was not actually final. And sometimes when I would first wake up, I'm thinking, well, where is she hiding? Did she go and move down to South Carolina? And this is all just a big ruse. It's just all a big scam. And I thought, no, this is some way of saying and that's a way of experiencing something greater than everyday reality. And that is how we experience God. So think about that. If you want to say something on that last day, saying, you know what, for me, what is a really profound experience is hope. And the way Nancy described it was perfect. To say you're sad, you've lost someone, but you know that there's more. The next thing is an experience of something being so bad that you say, my goodness, there's got to be something greater than everyday reality. And Berger would say probably the quintessential example of this would be the Nazis, for example. All the numbers of people that they killed, and to think that there's no possible way in our everyday reality and in our world that they can really get what they deserve. There's got to be more than this. There's got to be some place where they will experience judgment in a way that is appropriate to the crimes that they committed. And so when people say, wow, I can't believe the way people get away with all of this stuff. Nobody's there to stop them. We're the police when you need them. That's a way of saying everyday life is failing us because people are still getting away with these things. But those people who say, well, there's an ultimate reality, and that's what judgment day is for, and their day will come. So that's another way of experiencing. So if you ever said to yourself, here's another thing you could talk about, how is it these people get away with it? And they're never really called to account and held responsible. Everyday life has failed. You say, those with faith would say, yeah, but that my experience of dejection is not final because there's something greater. So that's an experience he has. And then the final one is humor. And humor is a way of saying there's more to life than tragedy. In the end, there is joy and there is laughter. Do you know that in some churches, I think they still practice it, Lutherans, well, some Lutherans still do. On Easter, they tell jokes. Why do they tell jokes on Easter at the service? Because Easter is a way of saying laughter has the last word. That sorrow lasts for a day, but joy lasts eternally. And when you can laugh and experience something outside of just the everyday tasks of life, but actually have moments of pleasure and joy, that is to say that there's something greater than everyday reality, and that is the joy of humor, and that is the last word. So I used to be big on humor as a way of experiencing God, but nobody understood what I was talking about, so never mind.
I don't have a sense of humor.
And so I'm going to suggest one more thing, and it's kind of related to this judgment thing, and that is we also experience moments where things are so bad that we say everyday reality can not only get better, it can get worse. And everyday reality, when it gets worse, reminds us that everyday reality is not final, that there might be something even worse. And that's where, Winston Churchill would say, there has to be a hell. And that's why I believe in God, because there's no other place fitting for Stalin and Hitler than such a thing. There has to be, because what they have done to this world and to people is so damaging and destructive of even everyday reality. It can get worse. And this is an exposure to that. And so when we experience that, and some people have actually come to the Lord by saying how miserable this world is, everyday reality can even get worse. Therefore, whether it's a literal hell or something, there's something worse than this. But if there's something worse than this, there's also something better. And they turn to the something better, which is God. A lot of people have had that. That's part of their conversion experience. So I conclude today by saying, I will always remember. Do you remember, it was probably in the maybe about 2014, 2015 or so, there was this horrendous terrorist attack in Paris, where they went in and they killed like 200-something people, these terrorists. I think they eventually caught the terrorists. The terrorists were brought to justice. But 200-something people were killed in this neighborhood in Paris. And everything was just destruction. It was like everyday reality had descended into something far worse. And they actually experienced a little bit of hell, where 200-some people were gunned down and murdered. It was as if, hell had come to earth. And then I remember about 2 weeks later watching the news, and the on-site reporter says, life is now returning to normal here in this Paris town, where just 2 weeks ago, a savage terrorist attack killed 200-some people. And in the background, you can see the delivery trucks are delivering bread now to the restaurants. And the people are now walking the streets with a little bit more feeling of safety. Normal is returning. Everyday reality, in other words. Because for the most part, people like to live everyday reality. I mean, it's where we live most of our lives. And when we have times when we descend into something worse, everyday reality doesn't look so bad after all. I used to say to people, the best thing about being sick is I come to appreciate how good normal is. When I'm sick, it's like, oh, I can't wait till I feel better again. I want to go back to everyday reality. But sick reminds me that everyday reality can actually get worse. And if that's the case, then people need to be a little bit more respectful of the fact that there's a greater reality than everyday life. And why not choose the transcendent rather than the descendant? In other words, the better than the worse. And that's where people have had experiences of receiving God and saying, I want to live in that ultimate reality because I've seen a little bit about what the opposite is. And I know that everyday life is only going to last so long. So these are some of the ways that you can start to experience God. You probably a lot of material today, and I do apologize for that. But it's been fun actually being with you. Really joyful for me. This was for me an experience of place. So I thank you for allowing me to do this, because this is the stuff that when I can actually do this, everyday reality just gets set aside. I experience the joy of God. So thank you very much for allowing me to do this today. And, one of the ways I experience God is sometimes with study, reading. It's like, wow, it's such a wonderful thing. So you have a lot of experiences with God, and that though we live our lives in everyday reality is not all there is. And it's somehow poking into it comes a greater reality. Next week, we're going to talk about the ultimate experience of reality breaking in, which was Jesus Christ, God in the flesh, and the experience that people had, who then became apostles and told others about this. And now it's kind of our deductive reality, because people have told us this is what Jesus was, what he did. But we also can have our own personal experience of Jesus in everyday life that lifts us to an ultimate reality. So.
Yeah, we have to be open to it. And
Yeah.
we have to appreciate when we get these little breakthroughs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a testimony in real time. The word-based church upstairs, unfortunately, a month or so ago, there was a tragedy, and they lost a 24-year-old. All of this 24-year-old Bobby's friends now attend. So exactly what you just said is happening right now. They want an ultimate.
Yeah.
The everyday they're jaded by it, and now they're singing their hearts. It's only been like 2 weeks.
Yeah.
They show up on a Wednesday, they show up on a Friday, and then they perform. This is all in real time. So everything that you're saying, clearly, God already knew, and you're sharing it with us because it's happening. And I'm so happy for them because, like you said, instead of resorting down to a descending, they're rising up and they're seeking out that ultimate reality, and they're making it happen in their world. I'm blown away by it because it just happened because of, you know, how God works. This happens, and then all of a sudden, this happens. It's just amazing.
If I knew how to program into church life these moments of transcendence, I do it, but I don't. I'm not in control. God is.
Amen.
I guess I have to just live my own everyday reality with you and your everyday realities, and just pray that God in God's grace will somehow intrude, interrupt, and show us a more ultimate reality than what we normally live.
Yeah.
All right. Well, anybody have a last word? Carolina, I can see the wheels
Come
turning.
on, Carolina.
No, I just, so those that you described were ways to experience God within our reality. But now I think about like all the new changes we have with technology and AI. AI is going to change our reality. And then, yeah, of course, everybody's going to experience life different. How, like, and then I wonder, like, oh, okay, so what are the new ways that we can maybe experience God? Or the opposite, like get closer to God, or maybe the opposite, get further away from God.
Yeah. Well, that's a good question. I think that's something that, well, sometimes inductive experiences are questions people ask us, like you just asked us now. Questions open us up. And how are we now going to experience reality and experience God in it in ways that are changing because we now have technology in certain ways? So that's a good thought. I'll think about that. I have no answer for it. All right. Well, you are released from this time of play. Get back into your everyday reality. But know that God will be there because God is ultimate. And all of that you're going to is just penultimate. It's second to last. There's something even greater. So thank you.